driven kind of intentional conversations with people amongst different industries and in different jobs and from different backgrounds. And it's been a really cool way of connecting communities together during this time and kind of giving everyone a place to reconnect with one another. So this industries and in different jobs and from different backgrounds. And it's been a really cool way of connecting communities together during this time and kind of giving everyone a place to reconnect with one another. So this industries and in different jobs and from different backgrounds. And it's been a really cool way of connecting communities together during this time and kind of giving everyone a place to reconnect with one another. So this industries and in different jobs and from different backgrounds. And it's been a really Okay, can you guys hear me? Can you hear anything else?
No, just you.
Cool. I'm a little scared to turn my volume up, so I'll say a little bit more, but I just wanted to say that was a bad example of how to do a call etiquette, which is what I was about to just talk about. So that's ironic, but basically, if everyone could just make sure they're muted when they're not talking, that'll help kind of everyone interact easier with one another. But also, we really do want to make these calls worth everyone's time. And I think they're a lot better when everyone is involved in the discussion and in the conversation. So, that being said as well, this is a very personal topic. And if there's stuff that you don't feel comfortable talking about, you can just kind of be a fly on the wall for that question and offer support in different ways. So that's kind of a little bit of a spiel for me. This is live streamed, clearly, as you all probably are aware. And so just a heads up on that, we've got a comment section going on. So if anyone's watching this from the live stream, feel free to jump in the conversation and add your thoughts, and we'll try and pull some questions in from the audience as well. I'll let Loren take it away from here and do a little bit of intro, and then we can go into introductions from everyone in the group. And Loren, do you feel like you want to lead that part?
Yeah, I will, although I'm happy to collaborate on this.
Yeah, so why don't you say your next part, and then we'll go into intros.
Perfect. So first of all, thank you all for coming. I know we're going to do an introduction in a moment. I just wanted to say one piece about why this is so important. I've worked within medical education now for 25 plus years, and some people on this call I think have known me during that entire time. So I think it's probably one of the coolest jobs in the whole world to have, but I think it's also one of the most humbling. And I think one of the challenges that we find in medicine is that there's a very, very high expectation to, not just succeed, but to sort of exceed expectations. And within that, there's an idea that like nobody ever fails or nobody ever falls down or nobody really has any difficulty. And the reality is, of course, that's not true. And I think that, for tonight's conversation, really what I want to dig into and look at is why this culture of silence around mental health exists and what we can be doing, within our own, with our own efforts and so forth to, I think, really open that up so that there isn't such a culture of silence. And I know it's a societal issue, but I think that it's an academic one, and I think it's a medical academic one specifically. So that's all I'll say. And I feel very passionate about all these topics, so I'm excited to look at them.
Likewise. So I guess we can sort of start by going around and everyone introducing themselves. This is something we do at the beginning of each call to really make sure everyone gets a chance to say who they are, kind of what their background is, where they come from, and what their intention is for the chat today. What do you want to get from this? Because I think that's really what drives this home, is making sure we're all aligned and on the same page going into the chat. So you've heard my intro already. I'm with Fireside at 5. I also work in marketing. I used to be doing a lot of marketing for 3 Denver hotels. I'm still with them, but unfortunately hospitality has been hit pretty hard. So it's been a pretty up and down ride. Loren, do you want to go down the line and call on everyone?
Yeah, why don't we start, Gabriel, with you, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like to get out of this evening.
Sure, thank you very much. So again, thanks for having me. I'm Gabriel Onsuero. I'm a 30-year developmental behavioral pediatric fellow at the University of Chicago. So technically I'm already graduated. In my mind, I already graduated. And I'm going to be joining the group over at Lurie Children's Hospital in August. So I'm really excited about that next transition. And, and I guess what I'm really passionate about, of course, definitely talking about challenges with mental health, and I see, younger kids, but also medical education. I think I want to get out of it and how I can be a positive role model, because I expect to be now in the attending role and on the other end, and how can I foster a positive environment where I can be sensitive to my colleagues and my trainees, mental health and well-being.
Thank you. No, that's nice to hear. And next to you in my screen, at least, is Robert. Robert, if you could unmute and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you'd like to get out of this evening as well.
Yes, thank you, Lauren. Hi, everyone. My name is Robert. I'm a second-year medical student at the University of Chicago. And I think for me, this is a very important topic because I'm getting ready to go into my third year of medical school. And I think what's interesting is I've heard different stories about how people engage with mental health through their clerkships. I've heard things from, oh yeah, it's okay to go to therapy when you're in internal medicine, to things like, oh, in surgery, you need to say something else because they could possibly make fun of you if you say that you have therapy. And so I think that there is still a stigma about taking care of yourself mentally, having a mental day. I think things are starting to get better slowly, but I think for me, what I want to learn is different ways to navigate, going through medical school, residency, my career, and just really how to advocate for myself and others in situations where people need to take care of themselves mentally, instead of the opposite, where people should just be driven to work and there are consequences from that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. And I think for all of us, I mean, I think, I guess I'll move on to Raina. My temptation is to start the conversation right now, but I will be good about not. So Robert, thank you for sharing that, and more to come on that. Raina, why don't you introduce yourself and let us know what would like to get out of this evening.
Okay. Hi, good evening. My name is Raina Ulrich, and I live in Peoria, Illinois, and I work at the University of Illinois College of Medicine. I work with Liz Kellington, who is also in this group. And I am the academic specialist, learning specialist there. So I work with medical students to help them be as successful as they can, academically speaking. And for me, the purpose that I wanted to join in this group is because, as an educator of over 20 years and now in this new role, that there are times where I think sometimes what a student is going through emotionally can affect their ability to produce the kind of results they're looking at in terms of academically and professionally. So I'm looking for ways to find that way to support them better, I guess is really what it is.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Raina. And I had the privilege of working with Raina not very long ago, so I know her in a couple of capacities. Alida, we're going to go to you. I know you're eating dinner, so we'll let you swallow. And when you're ready, go ahead and introduce yourself too, please. Are you ready? Or do you want me to...
I'm ready. No, it's not a dinner I'm proud of. I'm Alida Mack. I'm a third-year hematology oncology fellow in Detroit at Carmona's Cancer Center. And I would just like to take a pause and apologize if I was really loud, yelling, oh my God, I gotta go to this call with Lauren. If you heard me saying that at the beginning, because I wasn't muted, I apologize. But anyway, did you hear that? I might have heard it, but anyway, oh good, never mind. Pretend I didn't say that then. But yeah, why am I in this call? I feel very passionately about this topic. I think so many things, as you will hear, but I want to share my story. I want to hear the thoughts of others. I'm skeptical that things can change, but I'm also open and hopeful that they can. And I'm hoping that, I'll leave the conversation feeling a little hopeful because I think that as physicians, we kind of trained from within, we're doing ourselves a disservice with continuing this culture of everything's okay, be okay. And if you're not okay in here, that it's weakness. And I think it makes me crazy, not crazy, but it grates me that is what I see regularly. Okay, that's all.
Thank you for sharing that, Alida. And we didn't hear you at the beginning, so all is good. Jacqueline.
Hello, I'm I'm Jacqueline Pardo. I am a child and adolescent and adult psychiatrist, and I work at student counseling at the University of Chicago. So I see lots of students over the years who are struggling with just this issue, and have some observations and thoughts over the years, but I'm interested to hear what other people's perspectives are, and how a shift can occur.
Thank you. I agree. And Jackie and I've known each other for a very long time and worked together and still work together, but are also friends. And this is a discussion topic that we, reapproach frequently. And so it's with a lot of sensitivity and respect that we're having this conversation. Jillian Garcia.
Hi, I'm a M2 rising M3. I'm in like this weird transition part at the College of Medicine at UIC. I was a teacher before I came to medical school for 9 years. And I grew up in the East Coast, on the East Coast in Connecticut. And I grew up in an urban location, the same place where I taught. And one of the things that growing up, my mother was always a huge advocate for therapy. So I've been in therapy since I was very young, and it was sort of always just like this check-in thing. She believes in therapy more than she did doctors. She only believes in medicine now that I'm in medical school. Before that, like Latinos and medicine kind of clash, and Latinos and most minority cultures and mental health really clash because just all these different ideas. But one of them, I think, especially as women and women of color, is that somebody said, I don't remember about having, I think it was Alita who said that we have to pretend everything's okay and keep going. And I think part of that comes from the fact that we have this internal dialogue going on where people are expecting us to fail anyway, so we can never really just relax. And that puts a lot of pressure on us. And I believe it was Jackie who said, or Reina who said about, how our emotional health can really affect our performance. And so one big thing for me, why I want to be here today, there's kind of a two-pronged thing. One is the big social aspect. And as an educator and a future physician, I want to know how we can take care of people at their baseline, but also help them to achieve these things, because there's already these big gaps in education, in pay, and all these things that if we know that people who are in the inner city have more trauma and therefore more mental health issues, but they have less access and more stigma, then it's going to just widen that gap. And so I want to be a part of closing that gap, at least for access. Whether or not people go, that's a different thing. And then for me personally, as I said, I've been in therapy pretty much my whole life, and I struggle, with depression, with all sorts of things. And it's still, and I'm also, so another identity that I have is that I'm a lesbian. And so I feel sometimes that having mental health issues is sort of having to be out, and so it's like this identity that you hide. And every time you're in a new circle, you might have to out yourself again, and it can be discomforting. And also when I hear other people just say like really easily, like, oh, my therapist said, I always have this sort of negative connotation in my head, even though I'm an ally. And so I want to learn how to have the conversation the way that I learned when I was like coming out as a lesbian, that I had to like learn this language and learn how to do it. And now it's just very easy for me. But still somehow, even though I've been in mental health for much longer, the stigma of that is much stronger than even being gay. And so it's just something that I think that even if we participate, we need to learn. And then especially if we're in the field of medicine, we need to really make sure that we're allowing our patients to be able to talk to us.
Thank you, Jillian. You bring a lot to the conversation. It's really nice to hear all these different perspectives. It really is. I appreciate your honesty and just what you're saying. I keep wanting to dive in. We have one more person to introduce. That's Liz Balderas, although it says Kellington, but I think that's an old, or maybe that's a new name. I can't. Anyway, Liz, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you'd like to get out of tonight's conversation?
Yeah, this is Liz Kelling. Oh, wait, Yep, sorry. This is Liz Kellington. I am from the University of Illinois College of Medicine at Peoria. I'm an academic advisor. I have worked in education for over a decade. I previously worked in pre-K through 12 as a school counselor, and later worked in undergraduate education in counseling as well. And now I do more of the academic realm of things with medical students. And I think it's interesting to see the different ways mental health has continued and will continue to evolve, how it is viewed in different aspects of one's life, career, education. And I think that medical students as a whole are under so much pressure and stress that, but they're too scared to often talk about those fears, and they don't know who to go to and who to open up to. And so it's interesting to me to talk with them and just kind of learn more about some of the misconceptions that they have about why it is okay to seek resources or support for mental health, and that it is just as important as, finding an appropriate study tool. And so I'm just interested in this topic and in general.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I think I confused you with one other person, so I apologize. I made an assumption about your name, and I thought it was the other Liz from UIC, not from Peoria. So welcome, and it's nice to meet you. Thank you for being here. I think one piece I'd add, Gert, before we start in, the bulk of the work that I do today is also based on a premise of emotions and learning and how we consider them, and that we don't have the ability to separate them out. We can't stop and say, like, I'm not going to feel a certain way, whether that's about a test or whether that's about affectively something that's going on in your life, where you feel depressed or you feel anxious or worried. We can't stop that just because we have a test. We certainly can learn how to do more to maybe regulate it. But I think the point of that is that if we don't talk about the feelings, we don't actually talk about the affective component of what it means to learn, I don't think we really are touching the surface of learning at all. So I know we've got questions that are embedded in tonight's conversation, but at some point I want to circle back to that too, as we move into the discussion about culture of silence and whether or not you guys all think it exists, which it sounds like you do.
Well, that sounds good. And I think now we can kind of get started with those questions. Loren, do you want to kind of kick us off with the first one that you wrote there? Does everyone have the agenda pulled up? Awesome. Well, Loren, I'll let you kind of take it from there. I'll be taking notes at the bottom, you guys. So anything from this call that you want to look back on, there will be a notes section there for you to kind of come back to.
Yeah. Thanks, Gart. I think the first question is do you think there's a culture of silence in medicine around mental health? And I'm curious what everybody here thinks. So by all means, jump in, and I don't need to be the person sort of pointing to you to say, please speak. So just jump in and talk, and we'll go from there.
There's a culture of silence. I really think that what I see is we have to be okay. This idea that you're okay, because I just typed it in there, but I think that it's linked to being weak if you're not okay, and it's like having therapy, getting help, going to see, like coming to see you and Loren. Like I saw Loren all through medical school. If it weren't for Loren, I would not have passed through medical school, because I had so many emotional issues that decided to pop out of medical school and really impeded my ability to learn. And I internalized that as like, I am not enough, I'm not smart enough, oh my gosh, I'm an imposter, all of these things. But even coming down to your office, it was like sneaking down there, and then you'd see someone else and you'd be like, oh, you're here too. And I see that repeated, that, I never hear anyone from above. And all of, like, I've been through residency, I'm almost finished with fellowship. I've never seen any of my superiors talk about, hey, I've had a challenge, right? And we'll go to, and there are settings where it's appropriate, like we'll be at a retreat where it's like our wellness hour that we're going to talk about, and you never hear anyone. It's always, if you are having problems, it's okay, but it's kind of, you're pushed off as the other. And I have felt that, you know, you kind of have to be okay, and if you're not okay, it's okay that you're not okay, but you're also labeled as weak.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that sentiment. And I see Lauren currently, and it's always interesting seeing when some people leave and, you know, when I leave and some people go, it's like there's this exchange in which for, you know, this thought where it's like, oh, someone else is, you know, seeing Lauren. And so it's just so interesting, at least, especially in medical school, where you see other people that are doing so well, and it's kind of seen negatively if you know, aren't keeping up with them. And then there's this whole, you know, imposter syndrome, like you were mentioning, because, you know, it's worked so hard to get to medical school. Things are so difficult. With my instance in particular, my mom has schizophrenia. And so she always would tell me that I was not capable of going to medical school. And she also didn't believe in mental health. And I think that that manifested in the fact that she kind of tried to reject her schizophrenia. So she came off of her medications, and she just really allowed that to persist because of the fact that she just didn't think that it was real. And I think that that kind of was like, it really explains, like the schizophrenia, I think kind of explains that. And so growing up, things were very, very difficult. So I had to do things myself in terms of preparing for school. I took care of my siblings a lot. I had no guidance about college, no guidance about medical school, because no one in my family has gone to either. And so I've always had this feeling of, oh, you know, I'm not smart enough. And I've even seen that impact my abilities today, because even now, as I'm doing things, and if I get something wrong, or when I do like a question block. So step 1 is coming up. And so I'm trying to calm my anxieties, because there's that, you know, I've gotten a lot better throughout time with therapy, but there's still that thought in the back of my head from my mom that's basically just saying like, you can't do this, you can't handle this, like, you know, you might as well stop. So that's something that I'm still grappling with today.
Yeah, it's a lot. I think you bring up an interesting point, Robert. It's where my office currently is located at the University of Chicago. It's in a place where there's not a lot of privacy in terms of like a waiting room. And so a lot of times a student who's waiting to come in will often wait like behind a corner of the, you know, office suite or what have you. And it's interesting to me. And then there's always this sort of look of surprise when they realize that somebody they know is coming out of my office, or, you know, and we're very mindful about, obviously, about confidentiality and so forth, but, and respectful. On the other hand, I remember a couple years back, there were a certain number of students who had some difficulty with pharmacology, and I think there were about 5 of them in one of the classes, and I had asked the dean if I could just meet with all 5 of them at one time. And the answer was no, because then each of them would know that the other was needing support. And so I said, well, what if I ask them individually, and just to see if, like, by asking them, they might, you know, say, yeah, they all agree. I won't tell them who the others are. I'll just say there's, you know, 3 or 4 other people that might benefit from this too. And they all agreed. And it was a huge surprise, by the way. And it was my most like favorite thing to do, because I got to meet with 5, you know, students at one time in my office, where otherwise it was going to be 5 hours of the very sort of same or similar type of work. And it was so productive. And by the way, they all took and passed the exam, the board exam they needed to. So it certainly was effective in terms of outcomes. But it was also a really nice way to have a dialogue, a very open discussion, one in that case about failure, and 2 about just mental health and well-being, about what they felt like they perceived they were the only people who had failed this exam, and there were 5 of them right there. So clearly that wasn't the case. So, yeah.
No, thank you. No, and I think something that I think about is when I personally have experienced kind of that backlash. I reflect and I feel if the individual giving me that negative sentiment or that backlash have them themselves experienced that whatever, type of mental health, be it anxiety, depression, or being told, they were told they were not good enough, or being hurt mentally, and is this their way of trying to, in an unhealthy manner, cope with their hurt, with the experiences they've had in the past. And then they see the hierarchy where then there's a new set of individuals who, when I was in their shoes, I experienced this from someone above me. Now I'm in that position. Okay, it's okay for me to let out my emotions on these individuals, or try to shape their emotions in a way that it was shaped upon me. So I think in terms of trying to cut that is to be vulnerable. And everyone mentioned, I don't think people, those individuals in the teaching position are vulnerable to their students. And also, I think as much as we screen for tuberculosis and make sure you have all your shots, we should screen for mental health, and just it be something that, it's okay. Everyone, can have ups and downs, and it should not just be something where, oh, in case you feel, you're having a bad day, here's a phone number.
I have to respond to this because Gabriel, sorry, I know there's a question out there for Jackie from Ocean. I want to insert it in, or Gertie will insert it in just a moment, but Gabriel, I just want to respond to that because I was at a conference, ACGME conference in February, and there was a really cool presentation about this exact topic. And one of the hospitals, when incoming residents, so intern or CA1s, were coming into the medical center at the very beginning for orientation, this hospital is doing two things. One, well, they were doing primary care physician introductions. So like day one, they are connecting you to a primary care physician so that the residents are understanding how important their physical health and well-being is as well. And so I raised the question, why not do the same for therapy and have a clinical social worker, a set of social workers or psychologists on the premises as well, because there's so many people that transfer in as, first year residents, and they don't have, primary care doctors. They don't have a therapist. Maybe they've been taking medications across different, for different reasons, whether that's psychotherapeutically or, for physical diseases, et cetera. And now they need referrals. And so from day one in residency, to have that option to say, look, we value this so much, we're going to introduce you to primary care physicians as well as therapists right now. And this is part of the plan, that we have, the health insurance plan that we have for all of our residents, like, period, done. That, I think that could jumpstart some things.
I like that, but do you think there's enough buy-in to move that forward, right? Because I also
100% buy-in.
Really, oh, that's exciting.
100%. And so when they did this just for the PCP, at the PCP level, 100% buy-in. And when I raised the question about mental health in this room with many hundreds of people that were all like, huh? And I said, I think that we need to do the same for mental health. There was everybody, there was clapping, there was agreement across the board. I think people get it. I just think that people don't realize that you can talk about stuff like this and it's just fine. I really do. I believe optimistically the majority of people do get it. I do. I just think we've been programmed to believe that no one should ever talk about this. And I think that's where on this call, I think that's where we get to make a change. I think we get to make a shift.
And I think that's actually a really good segue into the question for Jackie, which the question is from Ocean, who's watching us right now via live stream. And she was wondering kind of about the experience of being a doctor whose specialty is mental health. Is it more talked about between psychiatrists? And that's, based off what you just said, Loren, I feel like that's a great segue into that. Oh, you're muted, Jackie.
So my experience is that, yes, it is. Now, I am based in student counseling. I'm not in the Department of Psychiatry per se, and I don't want to say anything conclusive, but my sense is that within the Department of Psychiatry, which is of course part of the more academic setting, I don't know how much it's discussed, but I'm not there, so I can only comment about my experience. So certainly the psychiatrists and the therapists at student counseling talk about it all the time, and the students who we see, medical students, talk about the challenge. Do they excuse themselves? Do they not excuse themselves? They're told that it's fine, but then when they speak with the individual resident, it's not necessarily fine. They're being, questioned about their priorities, or et cetera, et cetera. So my experience from what the students tell me is that it's not discussed in the medical school, medical center. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
Yeah, and sorry.
No, go ahead, Robert. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna add to that. That is something that's one part that people think about, but at least from what I know about, my friends and people I've talked to, there's also this barrier personally where it's basically like, oh, I've gotten so far, I've gone through so much, and it's this sense of just keep pushing through. So you push through even if it affects your mental health, you push through if it affects your like your physical and mental health. And so for me personally, I have sickle cell, and then I also have anxiety and depression. And so there have been multiple times where I've just pushed myself too far, and then I just end up collapsing. I'm in bed for days, I'm sick, I'm tired. And I think that in those moments, it's kind of when you realize I should really be taking my health seriously. And so with that in mind, it's even harder when you have to face individuals that might not be as welcoming or supporting of those conditions. And so then that makes things even harder. And then it becomes a cycle where you're like, okay, if they say that it's, I can just deal with it, then I'll just keep trying to deal with it. But then there's lots of ramifications about that. I knew this one student where she told me that she cried every day, and that she was not allowed to address that, to the point where she thought it was normal. Like they kept saying, oh, it's okay, it's normal, you're on your surgery rotation. And I think that that's a problem. I don't think that should be something that people accept as normal.
I agree. Am I muted? No, I'm not. I agree, Robert. I think that it's almost like, why is it valued that you should push yourself to the limit? Why is that the piece that's valued? Why is it not valued that you're doing like the absolute best maybe you can do, period? But versus like you have to go the extra mile. What is the distinction, and how would anyone even measure it? Like, how would we really know, right? Alita or Jeff.
As you're saying that, I'm remembering something we used to say as pediatrics residents, that if you to have an excuse not to come to work, you had to have blasts on the peripheral smear. You had to be that sick. Otherwise, there's no excuse, and you should come to work. So
culture is still prevalent today, and it comes from the top, but it also comes within your peer group, right? Because I mean, that's the foundation of medicine. You push through, you sacrifice yourself for your patients. And like, I'm all there for my patients, but I need space for myself, because if there's not enough of me, I can't take care of anyone else. And then our coverage system is a problem also, right? Because if you are sick, then you are directly affecting your peer. If you're not at work for any reason, then you're directly affecting someone else is having to like pick up the slack for you. And so it's a problem. And then, I remember in medical school, even making a decision for myself. I think a family member was sick. I found out that he had cancer, and I said, you know what? I had a shelf exam, and I was like, I need to postpone this exam. And I got so much pushback from a dean that, like, you know, when you're in residency, you're going to have to be more. I'm incredibly resilient. But you're going to have to be more resilient, and you can't just be, you know, kind of flaking out for stuff. So that's like, that is the foundation of our culture. You know, I know a resident, an intern. She got she got pyelonephritis because she held her urine all day because she didn't think she could go to the bathroom. So like, we talk about wellness, we talk about self-care, but I mean, we talk about it, but I don't think that that is actually something that, I think people want you, they don't want you to die on the job. They don't want you to die at home from your job, but like, they want you to push up to that point. And whatever you can put out, even if it's unhealthy, they'll take it. And we, as, because it's so like kind of patriarchal, for whatever, hierarchical from the top down, no one ever says, hey, maybe you should stop. Is this healthy for you? You know, because we're talking, I think, about students who have struggled, but I'm not convinced that the students who haven't, quote unquote, struggled academically, that they're okay either.
Let me, I guess, say one piece about this. I think, Alita, I mean, first of all, actually, it's really important to have a level of struggles and so forth. It's really important to, even at times, you know, fall down and figure like, oh my God, that was just too much. It's because we don't do that at some point, it is going to happen. We're going to bump into things that are really challenging. If we have no experience with being challenged in certain ways, then we don't realize that that's actually normal. Like I always say this, I said this to my own children and I always say this to my students, but I really do think like we celebrate when little kids are learning to walk. We celebrate the fact that they fall down all the time. Like we're like, yay, you know, and they get back up and then they keep walking right when they're like toddling along. And it's like, there's such, you know, there's such a sense of warmth and enthusiasm for that. But if we look, like by definition, we could say they failed at the task they're trying to do, right? They're trying to walk and they're not actually walking. I know it's a little bit of apples and oranges, but the point is that we celebrate something like that, which is their spirit to get back up and try again. I don't understand is why we have to sort of have a premise that we would need to push people so far that they feel like they can't literally go to the bathroom during the day or acknowledge that they're in therapy and they need to excuse themselves for an hour in the middle of, you know, a clerkship or in the middle of a rotation. To me, if they don't take care of that, then I think that, you know, as you said, I mean, you're going to get an infection, and this isn't. It's not. It doesn't even seem worth it. So part of the purpose for tonight was also to say, like, we all know there's a pandemic going on. We know there's so much happening in the world right now from a health perspective. And we know all of us either are on the front lines, some of you are, or all of us know people who are. And if we don't address this issue, the pandemic is going to be a pandemic, more so in the mental health realm on the back end. And that, to me, I think is something we can't afford to lose, you know, ground with. I don't think we can be cavalier about that or silent about that. There was a question in another one that was for Jackie and other clinicians, but this is specific to do doctors outside of psychiatry talk about mental health, or is it something that's really only talked about like within your office or within our office? And I mean, I know I have answers for that, but I'd like to defer to other people too. Gabriel, you're a physician, and Jackie, you are. Lita, you are. You know, thoughts about that?
Well, you know, so in developmental behavioral pediatrics, we deal a lot with the caretakers and then emerging anxiety, depression with our kiddos with autism and ADHD. And I think when we have a tough case, I think it just takes someone to open up the conversation in the workroom and be like, wow, you know, that was really tough. You know, that made me feel and kind of name the feeling, you know, we have inside and say, yeah, that makes me feel, gosh, that was tough. I feel kind of sad about that. Or, you know, that gets me kind of worried. I feel kind of anxious. I don't know what to do. Or, you know, I think to foster a culture or to foster an environment where people can talk, and then anyone can decide if they feel like sharing or not. And so I've started doing that as a senior fellow with my other fellows on the bottom, especially when I've seen them struggle. You can see it in their faces, and you can kind of take the pulse of the situation, and then where you can open the conversation and say, you know what, you look kind of stressed today, how you doing? But again, that's still, I guess, when I say maybe in the trainee level, but in terms of like in between, like above a trainee level, that's a good question. I don't know how much people are talking about, or if it's just casual conversations between colleagues that are friends that say, wow,
I
I'm
think
kind
it
of
does
burned
get
out.
talked about, though. I'm going to jump in on this one because I think in my line of work, I'm sandwiched in between sort of two areas, right? I'm in a space where I interact a lot with deans and program directors and so forth, as well as students or residents and fellows. And I think in the past couple of years, the thing that I've learned the most is just to be open and direct about whatever the issues are. And so I've learned to actually, as a clinician, as a therapist, we're taught not to be very self-disclosing, not to share a whole lot about who we are or what we are, that was sort of the premise when I was going through graduate school. But over the years, I think I've really shifted in that. And it's actually been helpful, I think, for me as a clinician, but I also think in talking professionally then with others. And so I'm going to answer the question in a different way and say, I think actually there are plenty of doctors, deans, program directors, et cetera, who absolutely acknowledge, yes, I'm in therapy, yes, I'm doing this, et cetera. Absolutely, definitely. Is everybody out talking about it freely? No, they're not. But I think actually more people do now than certainly than ever before. I would say in the past few decades, I think definitely more so. But I think it also requires us as clinicians to also allow ourselves to be in a situation to be honest and be open about that. I'm coughing, sorry. But go ahead, Jillian, yeah, or Jackie.
So I agree that we need to take, if we want a paradigm shift or any sort of stigma lifted, I think that we need to take it upon ourselves to be willing to be out there, even though it's uncomfortable. Even hearing about, and granted, I have not been in any rotation, so I'm not trying to say that people who hold their urine, are weak or anything like that whatsoever. But I also think that there comes a point where you need to advocate for yourself, so like if you do have an attending who is saying like, you can't go to the bathroom, it's like, no, I'm not your slave. Like I'm going to the bathroom. And I think that that's important as students. And I wonder how much of that is the age difference, because, I entered medical school at 34. So like nobody's gonna tell me I can't go to the bathroom, you know what I mean? But a lot, like I remember there was a girl who started at 18. So an 18-year-old would have a lot harder time dealing with that power shift. But for me, since I'm sort of the same age, I don't really feel that power shift as much. But also when I was an educator, I was a bilingual teacher. And one of the things I did was I put my students' work on the thing. We made cool, amazing like murals all over. And the other bilingual teacher was like, you can't do that, then people will know that they're bilingual students. And I was like, first off, it's not special ed where there is an IEP that is private. So like maybe you shouldn't be outing people. But even that, I would argue is like, you should, if we're gonna hide it, then that means there's shame. So if I'm not embarrassed to show your work in a sort of pride, like it wasn't embarrassing work, it was excellent work, then isn't that like an attribute? And to me, like when I first started working at the school, people were really embarrassed to be bilingual students. They thought they were stupid, they just had this really bad. And by the end, like everybody was like, Miss, can I be a bilingual student? Like, I want to learn Spanish. Like, can I come to your class? And I think that was because I sort of like made it cool. Like only this is an exclusive club. If you speak two languages, can you come here? And looking at the positive side. And I think one of the hard things to do with mental health is that because it's seen as a weakness, and also because there's a lot of vulnerability, and then there is this judgment, especially as students, because like when I need mental health, I'm not even allowed to go to the doctors because they might have to grade me later. But then I don't know, it's like, but they're gonna see me walking there anyway. I don't know, I don't really get it, but whatever. But I think that when you're hiding everything like that, that kind of leads to the idea that we should feel shame, and we should, like you guys were talking about coming in and out of Loren's office, like, and maybe this is because to me, all of it is just normalized from my family and my upbringing. But for me, it was just like, it was no big deal ever. And the shocking thing to me when I went from M1 to M2 was to hear in M2, all these girls, mainly white women, who had really struggled the first year that you would have never known, never. But I was so open about it. I was like, yo, I like passed that by 0.3%, you know? And so I thought everybody was being open, and they were just like, And then I found out like that they almost failed, and, you know, they got suicidal and all these things. And it was like, but I was talking to you, why didn't you open up? Like, but they felt so threatened, even though they really liked me and felt comfortable. And they told me later, like, oh, it was so great to hear that I wasn't alone. But it's like, yeah, but y'all didn't support me because I felt alone because nobody would talk up. And anyway, that was a long thing. Anyway, I think we just need to stop feeling the shame and stop feeding the shame by trying to, you know, make everything so private.
I think one thing, at least from my perspective, that I've seen is as we get ready to go into third year, I'm on Dean's Council, and so we've heard different things from like I'm a second year, but I've heard from first years, the third years, and the fourth years. And one thing that is kind of difficult to grapple with is the fact that we get graded clinically. Some people are really afraid of that, whatever they say, coming back and affecting their grade, especially if they want to go into a competitive specialty. And so we have UChicago is pretty good about having us, you know, give anonymous comments and say things in order to have something addressed. But I think that even at that point, people are still, they're not sure of how much they should tolerate. One of the medical students, she said that she was receiving certain sexist comments from her attending, and she didn't know if that was something that really was worth bringing up, because she thought, I don't know how this will affect my grade, like what if they don't do anything? And so I think that, at least in particular with third year, that's when things get kind of challenging, just because people are really worried that there might be some ramifications.
Can I say something? I guess so, everyone else is muted. I really think that the training, you know, most people are adults. Like, I was a non-traditional student. I did a PhD first. So I didn't remember how old when I started medical school, but I was a little bit older, and that helped me. But I think there's something about training that, being medical student especially, and then even that takes into residency, it actually kind of like de-adults you. I know that's not a word, but it takes away your, I think, agency as an adult. And you really, and so much of your grading and it's part of it is having people like you, having people think well of you. And so people put up with a lot of stuff for that. And there's a global, I think, from what I've seen, the people I've trained with, sense of disempowerment. Because I'm with Jillian, I'm like, I gotta eat, I gotta the bathroom, I can't do these things. But over and over, I've seen it so many times that it's not like, oh, one person here, one person there. It's a theme, you know. And I've talked to people who've trained at other places. I had a friend at the beginning of the pandemic. She was in the emergency room getting IV fluids because she got so dehydrated at work. Then she went back to work, right? And so you could kind of look at the individuals, but I think it is fundamental. I shouldn't say fundamental. It's integral in the way our training is now, at least in internal medicine and some of the subspecialties. I think surgery is probably the same. And I think if we want to address mental health, we have to address that part, because you have to kind of be empowered to advocate for yourself. And that affects your mental health.
Oh, sorry about that. I was muted. I appreciate that. Jackie, you looked like you were going to say something. I want to give you some airtime, and Reina as well. And then I have a final question. I know we've got about 10 minutes left. So Jackie, why don't you go, and then Reina, and then I will take a moment to raise a last question.
I wanted to go back to your question or somebody's question about do physicians in other specialties acknowledge mental health issues? And I think it varies in several ways. I mean, one, of course, is the individual. What are they like? Are they comfortable talking with people? What setting are they working in? I work in this, well, I'm connected to this academic setting where the views may be different from those in clinical practice, whether it's in a community health center or private practice, et cetera, et cetera. And I was thinking of a personal story when I told my, to illustrate this, when I told my father, who was an immigrant, who was an internal medicine doctor, that I was, after finishing pediatrics, I was going to go into psychiatry, he was, not at all amused. But over time he said, oh yeah, lots of my patients would come to me because they had something to discuss. And so there's a role of a primary care, doesn't have to be a physician, who can be a resource and a source of support for patients, whether formally or informally. And so I don't want to vilify the non-psychiatry specialties too much. Acknowledging that the experience within academia for medical students, I think, is very challenging. So.
I mean, I think actually for sure, and I agree with Jackie with what you're saying. Rena, I don't know if you wanted to say something about that, or if you were going to respond to something else, but please.
Well, yeah, I was just bringing up the point that I think a lot of it has to do with generations. It has to do with culture. There's so many different factors. Not only that, but for those in the medical community, in terms of what they're able to accept or not. But the thing is, grappling, which is what I mentioned in my comment, it's part of the learning process. Sometimes you have to struggle and feel uncomfortable to grow. And I think having conversations like the one we're having right now, each one of us is going to take away, and we're going to then project this on to people that we meet. And then if we can just kind of grow that into other people accepting what might be going on through one of our students or whatnot, then I think we can improve it. But I don't think we should be afraid of grappling. That's kind of the big thing that I was going to say.
I agree. And I'm going to say, Rena, I think everybody on this call, you really need to think about pushing it forward. And I always say, like, I feel like sometimes I'm on campus waving my flag, going like, please just, take this very seriously. And I know that every time I get the opportunity to meet with a student or a resident or a faculty or staff, I think that the goal is to be as open and honest as possible and as direct as possible, so that people understand that these are conversations that can occur. And the question I guess I have is, in closing, I want everybody to sort of think about this. How does your either campus, if you're a medical student or on staff or faculty or medical center or program, in the current situation where you are right now, how does it handle how open and honest those kind of conversations are about mental health? And what's like one thing, other than like letting me come in and open the door and say, okay, here's the conversation we're going to have. But what's one thing we can do, like when we return back to our native, institutions? One thing. And I guess I'd love to hear from each one of you. Just one thing.
For me, what comes to mind is just to be vulnerable and make it seem okay. I think people, like mentioned earlier, once you acknowledge, yeah, I'm feeling pretty anxious or stressed out, then maybe others say, okay, we're having this conversation, and it's okay to have this conversation in this setting.
I think that at least as a student who's going to be going into rotations, I think that when I read somebody's personality and feel their energy down, like really trying to take care of them and also leaning on them when I need help myself, so that way people don't feel so alone in trying to grapple, which is a necessary part of learning.
Yeah, to go off of that, I think that's a good thing too, is just supporting each other. So I'm younger, like one of like a very young student. And so, you know, a lot of things are very new to me just in general. So it's really nice when I have, you know, friends. I have friends that, you know, have gone through so many experiences. And I think that it really helps me to grow and to, you know, take on new things. And even from this talk, I think that it's really given me a lot of things to think about and consider and carry on that I think will be really useful in helping to change things and helping to empower people so that they can use their voice and deal with the challenges that they face.
I think it's important to be relational with individuals and to remember that no matter how busy you get, sometimes you need to just stop and listen to the individual. There has to be trust for them to share their situations, but you're not going to get that unless you spend time with them. So learning how to be relational with one another so we can help one another out.
I guess for me too, kind of, I want to just chime in really quickly. I think Gabriel, you were the one that mentioned this, but you were saying kind of like welcoming the conversation in certain settings. I think having these conversations on campus in a format where, like, if it's something that's it's really stigmatized and, you know, everything's very secretive and private, like I think there's association with being in a place that allows you to feel more comfortable opening up too. So like, how do you establish that kind of feeling that you have inside on your campus? It's like, I trust this place. They're looking after me. They want me to succeed. I can open up. I can feel safe here. And that might be something that the universities all have to do differently, but I think that's definitely something to mention.
I think for me, one of the things is like just sharing the story and talking about it, you know, and because that kind of breaks the shame. The more that you talk about it, having struggled and how it makes one feel inside. And then the other thing that I started trying to work on here with one of the psychiatrists is something like bringing shorts rounds to our institution, because we deal with so many people dying, and some of it's just gut wrenching, and we don't do anything. We don't talk about it. We just kind of move on to the next. And I try to, you know, so having tried to talk about it, it doesn't always go anywhere. So, but I think at least trying to bring that so that it's a forum where people are regularly getting together might help and segue some.
I totally agree, Alita. And I think you and I were trying to text each other within the group chat. And I don't know if what we were both saying is if it was being understood entirely. But I think in terms of what you just said, to me, I think like one of the most important things that can be offered within a department, particularly one where you're day in and day out, really, really contending with death day in and day out in very serious ways. And that's when there's not a pandemic. I mean, that's normal part of your work. I think that a component, I think this is an ACGME issue, would be to say, if we're going to say that there needs to be wellness or well-being support within departments, why wouldn't we then say one time a week, instead of it being presentations or instead of it being grand rounds, why not one time a week it's psychoeducational or it's an ongoing group? Why not? To me, that seems like such a logical place to put it. You have 1 hour a week of grand rounds and of, you know, presentations and so forth. Why can't there be 1 hour of psychoeducational work? And I think it could be done in a really cool, finessed way. I think it could be, you know, it can rotate. I think it could be lots of different things. And it's not that it's like mandating people to be in therapy. That's not it. It's about saying we take this so seriously that we think it should be embedded in the core components of our curriculum. And that one element of it needs to be that we have release time for this, just like we do for grand rounds, just like we do for presentations, just like we do for research, et cetera, and publications. Why not?
I think too.
I'm going to take it on. I am.
Good.
I think too, like creating these groups and having these chats once a week. Maybe this is, you know, part of that like longer ongoing series that Loren Academic Services does for people, and bringing people together as like a communal, you know, ground for us to talk about this kind of stuff. That could be really valuable for people in this circle, but I'm sure all of you guys have friends that would benefit from this as well. We are at 6 o'clock, so I just want to, you know, thank you guys all for joining today. This has been such a great discussion, and I hope you guys will, live stream or participate in the other chats that are coming up. We've got one next Friday and then one the Friday after that. And so those are going to be both great conversations, and I'm excited for the continuation of this series with Loren Academic Services. Loren, do you have any last words?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you guys. It means the world to me to bring people together. And I love the fact that Fireside at 5 has this real strong sense of community, and like that the component that we're talking about here is about community. And I think each one teach one, right? Like we get to push this forward now. And so we've created a small community for a brief period of time, and we get to go back out into our regular communities, and we get to bring this with us. And even just telling the story about this, I think actually does something to push it forward. And so I appreciate everyone's honesty and candor, and thank you for sharing all of this. This is really, really nice. Yeah. I'm writing a paper about it for sure.
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.
I want to say every time I'm like, why did I sign up for something?
Thank you.
Afterwards, I feel so happy. So
Yeah.
Yay. And you guys should go to some of these other cool Fireside Chats, by the way. I am going to one, I think in a week, on somebody's running on education, just totally unrelated to this, but there's some really amazing work that's being done, and people are all over the country doing this. And it's
And
is the website in the notes?
the website in the notes. I can put it in there just so you guys have it. But also that one will be an experiential learning chat. And so anyone, if you have friends or colleagues that you think would be interested too, feel free to send them an invite. Each chat is 8 people, just to keep it intimate and intentional and make sure everyone gets a chance to say what they want to say. So I think we've got probably 5 or 6 spots left. So first come, first serve. But yeah, I'll send the link to you guys in the group so you all can check us out. And thanks again for
Thank you, Gertie.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.
Have a great weekend.
Bye.